Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to week 3 and 4 of cleaning out the fridge to prepare for my upcoming move over 300 miles away. Between packing and whatever else we were taking care of for our move, there honestly wasn't a lot of footage from the final week, so I've just decided to include the two of them together. And if you haven't seen my two other videos in this series, I will leave them linked in the description if you'd like to take a look at them after this video is over. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Week 3 was definitely an interesting one for us because it included a lot more meat than I typically use when I'm cooking. I usually only use maybe 1 or 2 pounds of meat across our whole week of eating, but we really needed to start getting through it quickly, so I made up quite a few meals that were a bit heavy-handed with it. If you saw my week 2 of my fridge clean out, you'd have seen the meatloaf I made at the end. And here on the screen, I've just been frying up an egg to top off a meatloaf sandwich for breakfast. I got these buns from Kroger in their bulk bread bins just to try them out, and I'd say they're pretty good in flavor, but the seeds don't stick to the top very well, so they're just kind of messy to eat. My veggie drawer was starting to look pretty slim at this point, and of the stuff that was remaining, a lot of it wasn't looking too good. I had some celery and bell pepper that were a bit dried out, and some onions that were starting to get some mold spots on them, but luckily for me, I'm not afraid to just cut off bad bits of onion. I did give my knife and board a rinse after I took all those bad bits off, and then I just went about my business. With my big bowl of veggies nice and prepped, I went to the stove and started browning up some ground beef to make a batch of dirty rice. Now, I'm not usually someone who bothers draining the grease from ground meat, but this roll that I got from the food pantry was a bit juicier than I was expecting, so I lined a cup with some tin foil to get some of that out before I added in my big bowl of veggies. To which I sprinkled in some Tony's seasoning, a few bay leaves, basil, thyme, and I forgot to show it, but I did add about a teaspoon or so of chicken bouillon powder. And as for the amount of rice I added, I very scientifically measured about a mugful and figured that was probably enough. Once everything was nice and mixed in, I added in a pot of boiling water that I had been boiling on the side and gave it one last stir and put the lid on to let it cook for about 15 minutes on low. And you really want to be sure that you're using boiling water, because if you add in cold water straight from the tap, you will end up with mushy yet crunchy rice. So I definitely recommend that you keep that pot of boiling water on the side while you're getting everything else ready. And once those 15 minutes are up, you're going to want to keep the lid on, but turn the heat off and leave it for another 20 to let the steam finish cooking. And then to get some veggies in and use up a few of my quarter full bottles of salad dressing, I made up some salads, and I did try using those frozen egg white patties from the food pantry, but I don't really think those patties should have been frozen again because they let off a ton of water when they were defrosted, and they had like a very spongy texture, but oh well, it was easier than boiling an egg myself, so I'm not complaining. I was just reporting on the experience. Fast forward to the browning of another pound of ground beef, we were faced with another round of homemade Hamburger Helper by throwing in some garlic powder, onion powder, chili powder, and a few packets of some ramen seasoning in place of bouillon. If you have any other type of bouillon, you could definitely use that as well, but I have a bajillion of these packets in my cabinet. And then just to make sure everything would get mixed together evenly, I did add in the macaroni and cheese powder packets and the milk before adding in the cooked noodles. And this is probably like the third or fourth time I've made this on my channel, but it's probably our favorite way of using up the ground beef that we would get from the food pantry, so I'm not sorry, but if you have all these ingredients, it's definitely something delicious to make for dinner. And even though I'm supposed to be cleaning out the fridge, I did come across this 2-pound package of burger patties on clearance at Kroger, and it came out to about $2.50 per pound of meat, and I just couldn't pass up that kind of deal, so burgers were indeed had for dinner one evening. And then I did pack away a few for lunches the next day as well, so that's why I have some extra buns out. And to toast the buns, I do prefer to use mayonnaise rather than butter, so I went ahead and gave them all a thin layer before putting them in the oven to broil. I may or may not have forgotten about them for a second, but we're just gonna cover that up with some condiments. And if you've never seen beets put on a burger, it's actually very common in Australia, and now you've learned something new today. I still have about half a jar of these pickled beets to use up that I made a couple weeks ago, so I just put them on as something else to have added to the burger. And honestly, I can't really say that I really tasted them. We had to pile them on before we started to taste the beet flavor, so that could be just the beets that I was using, or it could just be the way beets go. I don't know. I haven't had many beets in my life, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, but these burgers were pretty good. Here's a random clip of a tuna sandwich. I don't even remember making tuna, but the video was taken during this past week, so I'm just gonna include it here. We probably made it in an attempt to use up some condiments from the fridge door, and I love tuna, so not complaining about a tuna sandwich. Sometime later, when we were down to our last burger patty, I was looking for something savory to make for breakfast, and I made the executive decision to chop it up and toss it into a batch of ramen, along with some onion, a hatch chili, and a few teaspoons of gochujang paste to give the whole thing a little pizzazz. This wasn't really one of my most favorite ways that I've made ramen before. And believe me, I eat a lot of ramen, so it's kind of hard to say I have favorites. But this one came out okay for what I had. I think the flavor profile of the burger patty and the gochujang maybe weren't the most compatible. But if someone gave this to me to eat again, I would eat it. It wasn't bad. But anyway. I think from this point, we're starting to bleed into week 4, and at this point, all bets are off. All the meat from the previous week was kind of starting to make my head and stomach hurt. So for these next few meals, I wanted to go back to stretching the meat with carbs and veggies. I'm not trying to give any dietary advice. I'm just saying we were not used to eating this much meat all at once. So starting with this roll of turkey, I mixed in some lentils and seasonings to make some meatballs to go on top of some spaghetti. And while those were in the oven, I had started a pot of water to boil with some sweet potato, and when they were almost done, I added in my pasta. This way I get both of them cooked and I don't have to do more dishes than necessary. And when everything was done, I drained the pot and fished out the sweet potato to get it mashed up before I added in my tomato sauce and seasonings. I'm not sure why the camera cut out here, but here's what it looked like once it was all said and done. If you're lactose intolerant or avoid dairy for any other reason, I would highly recommend that you try adding in some mashed sweet potato to not only add the sweet potato flavor, but it also thickens the sauce and makes it nice and velvety. It could be made smoother if you sent it through the blender or spent more time mashing it, but I really couldn't be bothered. And so yeah, sometimes there are little chunks of sweet potato in my sauce, but it's fine. At some point between all the packing and planning, my sweet tooth kicked in, so here we are mixing up this cookie mix that really kind of didn't end up being that good. I had gotten it from CVS a few months ago whenever I was trying to use up the last of my extra bucks, and it just wasn't that good. And then at some point, Ibotta had an offer for a free bag of chocolate-filled marshmallows, so I fished out some graham crackers from my cabinet and made us some s'mores in the oven, and those were really good. Cantaloupe also went on sale at my grocery store, and they've been so good that I couldn't pass up the chance to pick up another one before heading out, so we had ourselves some freshly sliced melon topped with tahini and chamoy to cool us down during these hot summer days, and definitely between all of the nonsense of packing, it was very nice to have a nice chilled bowl of cantaloupe at the end of the day. To finish off my last pound of meat in the freezer and then get the last of my veggie drawer cleared out, I made a classic pot of clean out the fridge chili. At first I wasn't really sure how much food it was going to be, but once I started chopping everything up, it became very clear that we were pretty much going to be eating only chili for the next 2 days at least. And as an interesting side note, I added about a tablespoon or two of brown sugar out of habit, but I probably could have left it out entirely due to how many carrots were in the pot. They actually added quite a bit more sweetness than I expected, so that was kind of neat. I was able to use up the last of my cooked lentils from when I'd made those meatballs, and I didn't show it here, but I was also able to use up the last of that bottle of wing sauce that's been in the fridge door. And with all this combination of veggies in this pot, it kind of made it look more like a soup, but in flavor, it still tasted just like your average chili. So if you've got a lot of vegetables and maybe a roll of meat or not to use up in your fridge, I definitely recommend making a big batch of clean out the fridge chili. And I had it in my head that I was going to serve this chili on top of a baked potato, but ultimately I decided that I couldn't be bothered to put in the effort to actually scrub the potatoes, so I scratched that idea and just made some white rice instead and called it a day. Then to use up my milk and the last of this bag of frozen mixed berries, I threw a banana into the bag to freeze along with them, and the next morning I made a smoothie. My one banana ended up not being enough to combat the tartness of the berries, so I did end up adding a little bit of maple syrup to make up the difference, and it was so perfect because I was able to use up the last of this bottle of maple syrup, so I did not have to ferry it along just for like a little teaspoon of maple syrup that was in it. I honestly didn't even realize the bottle was so low, so this worked out very well for me. On one of my final trips to Walmart, I was there to pick up some boxes and whatever else we needed to pack, and I decided to take a stroll through the store and do some window shopping. And to my surprise, I came across Walmart brand vegan plant-based cheese. I seriously couldn't believe my eyes. And after checking the Walmart app, I realized that this cheese was not carried by any of the stores where I was moving to, so this was my only opportunity to try it. If you want to look for this in your store, it is in the cheese section. At least it was at my store. Usually plant-based cheeses are kept in like the produce aisle, but this was in the cheese section, so that was so crazy. I only really noticed it because it was a different color packaging than all of the other, like, I think they do like purple or a dark blue kind of color for all their other cheeses, so that was so exciting. For the mozzarella, I tried to make little pizzas in my air fryer, and I think the flavor was okay, but not super strong or all that intriguing. It was such a good price though that if it ever shows up at my store, I'd probably buy it again. Now, the cheddar, on the other hand, was so much better than the mozzarella was. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it tasted exactly like cheese, because that's like trying to tell you that almond milk tastes like cow milk. It's just not going to happen. But what I can tell you is that it did indeed add a really nice creaminess and funky flavor to this batch of eggs that I made for breakfast. And if I were going to recommend you try either one of these, I definitely go for this one if you just want to try one. One night, to finish up the different jars of pickles and some fruit, we had ourselves a little date night charcuterie board. That little purple lump at the bottom is some goat cheese from a local goat cheese operator in the area. It was very nice. Served it on some toast. And the official final meal that I cooked on the stove in this apartment ended up being some beef and broccoli ramen. A bag of broccoli was one of the final things in my freezer, so I picked up this bag of Gardein vegan beef tips to try. I was looking for their Gardein orange chicken, but they were sold out, so this is what I went with. When I first started getting into a plant-based diet about 4 or 5 years ago, I became completely obsessed with the Gardein chicken strips and fish sticks, so I was pretty interested to try this bag out. My first comment would be to please ignore that they're ripping apart. It was 100% the fault of my pan. It's losing its non-stick coating, so things are starting to stick unless I use a lot of oil. As for the tips themselves, my boyfriend and I felt it mostly just had the same taste and texture as tofu. Granted, these cubes were pre-seasoned tofu, so it's not that they were bad, but not as firm of a texture as we were expecting. Again, that could have been the fault with my pan while I was cooking. We decided that we did like it, but it's probably something we'd only keep on hand to have as a quick dinner option rather than a regular item in our menu rotation. because it's probably cheaper for us to just buy and season our own tofu on the regular, but it does make, like I said, for a good quick grab and go dinner option. And that's it, you guys. We have officially made it to the end of an era in this apartment. I was so successful in my mission to clean out the fridge that I was even able to put some other sauce bottles from the pantry into my cooler to have the peace of mind that they wouldn't spill all over the place during transit. And I did take a few sippies out of some water bottles so I could freeze them and then use them as ice packs for the trip because there wasn't quite enough room to warrant buying a bag of ice, so I just used a couple of those. As for what lies ahead on this channel, I'm not really sure, to be honest. I'm really just so exhausted from this past years of events that I do think I'm going to take a break from the average workforce for a few weeks, and who knows, maybe in that time my channel will blow up and I won't have to go back to the same 9 to 5, but I doubt it. Whatever happens, I want you guys to know that I have very much appreciated and loved having you guys in the comments to talk to and interact with. I'm so glad that so many of you have found my channel interesting enough to come back to and continue watching as the channel has changed over the years. And I hope whatever we end up doing in the future will continue to help out and or entertain you guys. And so yeah, that's the whole video. As always, if you guys have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. If you're interested to see where this channel goes from here, please subscribe to my channel to be notified whenever I figure that out and decide to upload something else. And I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!